and welcome to a discussion on the topic minority groups and the religious dimension. Let me first start with the very basic definition of a minority group. You see, a minority group can be defined as a small group of people within a demographic area. Basically, it is a group differentiated by the power holders of the society who mostly constitute the majority in the society. These minority groups are defined on the basis of various characteristics such as wealth, gender, race, ethnicity, etc. But of course, these are not the only parameters. In the context of social sciences, this term minority implies those groups or categories of people who hold few positions of power in the society. Now, this kind of categorization can take place directly based on an individual's recognized membership of a minority group that might not even count what personal achievements he have had, or it can be indirect determined by social structures that might not be within everyone's reach. Sociologists of religion have often explained the rights that should be possessed by the minorities. In sociological literature, these are often explained in terms of handbooks, encyclopedias, etc. You see, today sociologists emphasize modern new religious movements and also try to study the minorities with reference to it. Speaking of new religious movements, let me state that new religious movements have focused more on religious diversities rather than religious monopolism and have tried to integrate the entire population together, thereby bringing the minorities into the mainstream fold. The British sociologist of religion James Beckford tried to understand the situation in France in 1985. Actually, the story dates way back in 1905 when the state and church became separate institutions, and eventually it was the state that started working as a dominant institution. As a result, there was a parallel situation where both Catholic ideas on the one hand and secular ideas on the other existed side by side, each with their own set of beliefs and ideals. Even in other European countries and the other communist nations, it could be found that the historic forms of religion were slowly losing their significance. In India too, there was the emergence of a new religious movements which made a distinction between the classical and the medieval Hinduism. Such movements are believed to have been influenced from the Western culture only. But on the flip side, there was also an evident criticism of these new religious movements that surfaced in Europe and other countries. There was marked resistance to this as the church and the state had different perspectives and beliefs regarding their own religion and practices. Attempts to overcome these problems were difficult to handle, and consequently problems related to finance, property, administration, etc. also cropped up with the passage of time. Now, in this particular section, let me brief you about the new age. Before straight getting deep into this, what I must say is that sociologists have different viewpoints and perspectives regarding the new age. You see, although the new age has given freedom to all the individuals to explore their own beliefs and practices, but needless to say, it was also resisted by many. Now, if I am to speak of the new age, mention of Paul Hillas famous British sociologist and anthropologist, becomes noteworthy. Well, Hiller's study revealed his concern about the relationship between the New Age and the mainstream society. Actually, what happens is in the New Age, there is an array of diverse ideas, and these different ideas eventually give rise to the concept of self-spirituality. These self-spiritualities can be considered to be both our friend as well as our foe in terms of religion. As a friend, they do not emphasize on the materialistic condition of people, while as a foe they emphasize on the traditional belief by giving importance to God or the supreme power to whom we all must submit ourselves. Well, you see, these self-spiritualities faced a lot of flack from many because many believed that these have largely affected human life and society in a rather negative way. Here again Paul Hiller's is worthy of a mention. Hiller's work focused more on finding a religion bound by self-spiritualities and not old traditions and customs like it used to be. What he eventually found in the course of his study is that people of the present world strive to be more serious in work because of the notion of profit production capitalism. As a result, their work becomes so important to them that the line between what is work and what is life slowly fades and diminishes. In this section, I will speak of some other faith communities. Well, the migration of a large number of religious minorities to Europe due to rising economic crisis in their respective places led to the coming together of people, mostly minorities. And so, what happened is there could be found different religious beliefs in different countries. In France, as we know, the terms Arab and Muslim are used as synonyms, whereas in Britain that did not happen as Arabs are rarely present. Then in West Germany there was a separate Muslim constituency for Turkey and Yugoslavia. In the Netherlands later immigration got eventually encouraged from most of the colonial territories. With the advent of the 20th century, many European nations like Spain, Italy, Greece began encouraging immigration of minorities from other parts of the world. These shifts in demography, as expected, bore several implications, many of which were by nature negative. The migrants settling in the European countries along with their families led to more consumption of the country's economy than contribution towards its growth. This led to a rise in the number of unfed, malnourished, dependent people in the country. It also led to increasing competition between the natives and the migrants regarding employment, schooling, housing, sanitation, etc., thereby adversely affecting the nation and its natives. As we come to understand that, this in turn led to the need to find alternate sources of labor and income, and also an urgent need to have more number of working people in the population to reduce the burden on the economy. But then you see, eventually the migrants who came in search of a better life settled down in Europe permanently, which caused massive unrest in urban areas where racial and ethnic tensions had a major role to play. I now speak of three major stimulants, rather countries, in this regard of our discussion: Britain, France, and the Netherlands. Well, these three have different perspectives regarding religion and its movements. In Britain, for example, it violated almost every assumption of the modern, radical, liberal, and tolerant society. The reassertion of religious tolerance in the UK, as proclaimed by the Queen in her 2004 Christmas broadcast, at the time of the Sikh strife and turmoil in relation to the opposition against Beheshti, is indeed a remarkable coincidence. Well, I am sure many of you must have heard of the Beheshti incident I just mentioned about. Beheshti was actually a play written by Gurpreet Kaur Bhatti, a British Sikh playwright. The term Beheshti in Punjabi means dishonor, and the play caused severe controversy in the UK after its opening night, as it included a scene set in a Sikh temple showing rape, physical abuse, violence, and murder. Anyway, what I was saying is that though the Queen's statement on religious tolerance was only a standardizing one, religious diversity was welcomed warmly by the minorities in Britain. Apart from giving recognition to the existence of diverse religious communities, the Queen also stressed on the many positive aspects brought about by religious diversity. Perhaps that is why she even did not hitch to visit the worshipping places of Sikhs and Muslims. Now, a positive aspect of religious diversity is that religious diversity was seen to lead to improvement of society, thereby enhancing its cultural and social value. We know that in Britain the church is a dominant player that exercises considerable influence over the monarchy as well as the House of Lords. The recognition of the differences between a strong state church of the past and its weaker equivalent present in modern society is of significance, as you can note. While the church was exclusive and focused on Christian communities, the latter became the de facto umbrella body due to its widespread impact, which included within its sphere all people notwithstanding their religious affiliations. Gradually, there was a transformation in the character of the church as it became more and more inclusive. The various changes taking place in a very practical and fragmented manner caused a growing difference between the conformists and the atheists. But of course, there was a bright side. The idea of brotherhood was accepted by all as people came to recognize the importance of unity in a society marked by moral, scientific, and technological advancement as well as tolerance. Well, now to speak of France, you see, in France the affair "Do Follow Them" caused a similar dilemma and unfolded as a series of events taking place towards the end of the 20th century. Muslim girls wearing the headscarf or the hijab were sent back home from schools in Paris. Two justifications were offered for this. First, France's propagation of the ideology of laicite, that is to say, a secular society, and second, various institutions like the school and the state were responsible for the creation or spread of the ideology of secularism. This was in line with the ideas of the Catholic Church. It does not come as a surprise that the problem arose due to the fact that religious symbols were ostracized from the domains of the state as well as of the school. What happened is, during the post-war period, the cross, which is a symbol of Christianity, and the yarmulke, which is a symbol of the Jews, were accepted, but the attitude towards Muslim religious symbols was biased and they were prevented from being used in secular institutions. This led to a lot of tumult, debates and expulsion, in addition to a continuing public debate and disagreement. You see, both Britain and France have tried to justify the events. They have emphasized the sequence of events, and that too in a chronological order, beginning from the expulsion of Muslim girls from the school, attempts at solving the problem, the definition of an ostentatious religious symbol, and prohibition of using them in the educational institutions and other such things, while explaining the fundamental principles of laicide. The law, supported by the French people, rules out wearing anything that symbolizes any religion in educational institutions, thereby affording democratic and secular values. Whereas in Britain, wearing headscarves to school was acceptable. Thus, what we find is that the problem lied in the ongoing friction between pluralism, tolerance and democracy, as symbolized by the absence of monarchy, a church-controlled state and a half-reformed House of Lords. Democracy was more evident in France. The citizens were expected to adopt the national culture, which would grant them equal political rights. It must also be noted that France looked down upon the concept of communautarism, as it indicated alternate loyalties to religion or anything else, while Britain on the other hand accepted group-based identities in addition to national commitments. Thus, all we can say is that Britain, though less democratic than France, is far more tolerant, as it allows the usage of religious or group symbols in both the public and the private life. A question springs up: do the bombings of 7/7 and the subsequent threats severely diminish the tolerance level? Undoubtedly, it is very difficult to come up with an appropriate answer. However, what becomes obvious is that it has not only led to an increase in the debate centered around the faith communities living in Britain, but has also inevitably led to a rise in the hardships suffered by the Muslim minorities. If we look at the positive side, it is good to know that influential public figures have relentlessly pursued the agenda of affirming the cause of the Muslim minorities. They have tried to depict the underlying differences between the principles preached by Islam and the aggression of the attacks, along with the inherent differences in the thoughts of the miscreants and the remaining Muslim population. This is further proved by the polls conducted by the BBC in August 2005, which went on to show that a whopping 62% of the Muslim population believed that multiculturalism made Britain a better place to live in. However, you must keep in mind one thing: we are not yet sure as to whether this view has any permanence, as there is no way to determine if the attack was an isolated incident or whether it had sparked of a chain of similar events. A contrasting picture is witnessed in the Dutch society. Their very foundation was rocked when the murder of two public figures, one an acclaimed politician and the other a not so famous film producer, were killed in broad daylight. The perpetrators had not even waited for the cover of darkness, and this intensified the people's fears. Like the Belgians, the Dutch had made it mandatory for its people to follow the pillars constructed by them, comprising of the Catholic, Reformed, including the Re-Reformed and the secular divisions. These permitted all aspects of an individual's life, ranging from education, politics or social services, which were constituents of the public spheres, to the different issues confined to the private realm. Even during the post-World War period, the Dutch tried not to secularize themselves, much like the country of Quebec in North America. However, when the process was initiated, it brought in its wake widespread changes, including those happening in the political sphere. These changes were particularly witnessed with the emergence of new forms of religious life among the Dutch during the 70s and 80s. As I have said before, the Dutch society is symbolized by its spirit of tolerance. The Dutch have been advocates of new ideas, heralding a new era of change, ranging from legalization of soft drugs or advocating the cause of ethical issues like euthanasia. The Anne Frank Museum must be mentioned in this regard, since in addition to portraying the remarkable strength and ability of Anne Frank, it also reminds us of the importance of tolerance, like the gay issue. I have already mentioned the occurrence of two murders. The first one was that of a prominent politician who had stormed the political stage in 2002. Pim Fortuyn was trained in sociology and always embroiled in one controversy or the other. Being gay himself, he supported the French acceptance of his lifestyle. What surprised many were his ways of dealing with deviations from the common norms, particularly the Muslim population. Although the Dutch society epitomized religious tolerance, its people were ardent supporters of Fortuyn's anti-Muslim ideas, along with his aim of ending all immigration and his desire to reduce crime rates. Greatly encouraged by the overwhelming public response, Fortuyn laid the foundation of a new political party to contest during the elections. However, his good fortune came to an end when suddenly 10 days before the commencement of the elections, he was shot to death while he was leaving a radio station. No wonder the Dutch were too perplexed. A question comes to mind: in the name of glorifying liberalism, are we justified in excluding those whose viewpoints differ from the commonly held beliefs of the wider society? Fortuyn, you see, was different from the right-wing popularists, since he advocated acceptance, but with exclusion. Unlike prominent leaders like Jean-Marie Le Pen of France or George Haider of Austria, he had wanted a Dutch society which would be advanced in terms of stability of population, ethical progression, even welcoming unconventional lifestyles. However, the traditional political class felt his idea was flawed in the sense that he wanted to show the door to all those who tried to express ideas in opposition to the larger whole. The socially liberal attitude of the Netherlands proved to be the fermenting ground for Fortuyn's liberal ideas. He received massive support from the Dutch population, and it became obvious that he would triumph the elections. After Fortuyn's sudden death, he was hailed as a martyr. People started clamoring to express their opinions, which they had been forced to stifle for a long period of time. Even though secularization was advancing at a rapid rate, it did not necessarily indicate a new class to show whether secular nationalists were emerging. The advancement of Islam in leaps and bounds further complicated the situation. The Muslim community started emerging and projected themselves as an independent community. The Dutch found this difficult to comprehend. Thus, it becomes evident that in order to successfully analyze the Dutch society during the first decade of the 21st century, the process of de- and re-pillarization should not be forgotten. The dispute between liberalism and multiculturalism returned with a vengeance when a horrifying murder rocked the Dutch society just 2 years after the Fortuyn's occurrence. Theo Van Gogh was the recipient of a fatal attack when he was shot and beheaded, in addition to being ruthlessly stabbed in an Amsterdam street, and that too without the anonymity provided by darkness. Van Gogh had been killed by a young Moroccan Muslim. Van Gogh's only fault was producing a film which highlighted the inhuman treatment meted out to the Muslim women by their male counterparts. Certain aspects were considered as going against the values of Islam. Questions regarding the resolution of this problem and finding a suitable way for preventing this atrocity and violence has befuddled the scholars, administrators, and the common people. It will be wrong to assume that the Dutch behaved in a broad-minded manner. In addition to sending back the asylum seekers to their native place, they also forced the immigrants to forego their own lifestyle and adopt the values upheld by the Dutch. The issue which has not been given any attention is the ways in which the Dutch can promote harmony among the distinct communities residing within its boundaries. The Anne Frank Museum has quite nicely tried to spread this message. Even though the Dutch and the British reflect similarities in the ongoing debates, unlike the British, the debate in the Netherlands is guided by the Dutch. While concluding this discussion, I would like to highlight some important points. Firstly, the Islamic world extends varying degrees of hospitality to different Westerners. This is similar to the attitude put forward by the dominating players of the world, Europe and America, who project diverse ways of incorporating various religious elements. It is quite obvious that the religious views of the entire society will not be the same. the religion which exercises the most influence is the one which is followed by the majority of the population. These strictures should not be ignored as they reflect a crucial aspect of the society. Secondly, any discussion on religion should take place within the framework of rapid industrialization, which has facilitated the movement of labor to diverse regions in addition to encouraging the spread of information. The Western communities, in addition to the Muslim counterparts living alongside them, are bound to consider the various events happening worldwide. It is then hardly astonishing that the concepts of pluralism, tolerance and democracy are deeply influenced by events such as the 9/11 bombings or the attacks in Mumbai, as well as the war taking place in Iraq and the Middle East. Not only the Muslims but also the non-white and the non-Christians living with them are also adversely affected by these occurrences. The attack on the Twin Towers has disrupted the fragile balance existing in society and has brought about widespread tension and disharmony. The fact that innumerable disciplines are engrossed with these problems is hardly surprising. Firstly, religion and society are not independent of each other. While propagating his constructivist approach, Beckford, whose mention I had made at the beginning of this discussion, has proved that it is the sole responsibility of the viewer as to whether he wants to consider these things in a positive or negative manner. Secondly, the boundaries existing between religion in public and private life has started to blur. The emerging Western population, along with the susceptible Muslim population, operates outside these terms. It becomes quite apparent that there is hardly any distinctions left between the public and the private lives. Finding an appropriate solution to the problem is quite challenging. Different sections of people have different viewpoints. Some believe that Muslims should ardently follow the habits of their fellow society members. However, this curbs the freedom of the minority community in keeping alive their own distinct traditions. Opposing this view are those who believe that the minority communities have every right to follow their own lifestyle and they should be recipients of special concessions. This again has a negative aspect as it fosters problems such as terrorism. The commoners, however, depict an amalgamation of ideas depending upon their personality type and the place they inhabit. The resolution of these issues has become quite important. This can only be achieved if the communities engaged in these difficulties are invited to put forward their ideas. Thus, it becomes quite obvious that religious identities can only be successfully analyzed within the public sphere and that they should not be relegated to the private life. With this, I come to an end of the discussion on the topic minority groups and the religious dimension. Thank you for attending the lecture. We will meet again in some other discussion on some other module. Thank you once more.